Corinthians 4. Treasures in jars of clay. Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. Rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants, for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our hearts, to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may be revealed in our mortal body. So that death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. It is written, "I believe, therefore I have spoken." With that same spirit of faith, we also believe and therefore speak. Because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus from the dead will also raise us with Jesus and present us with you in his presence. All this is for your benefit. So the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For all our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal.
Thanks, Ron. Put the lights up. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry if this is one of your first times here and you're sitting on this side. I'm not a big guy, but even I impede your vision to the PowerPoint. That just kind of comes with the territory. You'll learn to start sitting on that side. You guys got to figure it out. Or like right here, it's this group that's just... A special welcome to anybody who's here for the first time today. Because I always feel like, all right, you know what? It did deserve a clap. That's okay. That's okay. I always feel like it takes a special courage to visit a church. Because a lot of people don't have great experiences at church. And so I think to come back to a church, if you've been gone for a while, or to go for the first time, or to keep going, all of it requires courage. And I respect and appreciate that. We're going to continue our series on Corinthians. If you haven't been here the last couple weeks, we've been going over 2 Corinthians. We're the fourth part of 10. So don't be dismayed if you missed the first few. You still have the majority to go. And don't be dismayed if you've been here for all of them. We're almost halfway done. So either way, don't be dismayed, right? A couple things I want to say before we introduce the sermon and got into it. One is that Kristen and I have the honor of leading the church here. We have our 3 kids. My name's Kyle, and my wife's name is Kristen. And we actually have some really great friends in town who are disciples down in Florida. I won't make you stand up, but Tyler and Tiffany are like 1, 2, 3, 4 rows back on the corner there. We all went to college together. We were great friends there, and they're just spending a couple weeks with us just to hang out. And it's been a blast. And I want to just real quick, I like especially introducing my friends from out of town that are like really great people, like really cool people. And they're both national champions. And they're not the kind of people that would say, like, slide that in the conversation. Like, oh, what's your name? I'm national champion. Tyler. Tyler took his flag football team, his collegiate flag football team to the national championship. I know I was supposed to go one year, and then I got food poisoning, and then I couldn't go. And perhaps that actually helped the team. Who knows? And I wasn't there when they won. And Tiffany is a 5-time national champion in a type of equestrian something, but I can't remember what it is. She worked with Arabian horses, which are like really beautiful horses. And from like the ages of like 9 to 12, won like 5 national champions. They probably don't even want me to say that, but I just felt like I had to.
Got to do it, bro.
Something that's important to know about me, if this is your first time hearing me speak, is that I was, whenever I start this, people always think I'm going into a joke. I'm not going into a joke right now. I'm just preface it. This is a real thing. I have a facial tick. You're probably like, yeah, we know. We knew. We've known for a long time. If it's your first time, I always like to tell people when there's a lot of new people, because it can be kind of a jarring experience to watch the person on stage tick. It's taught me a lot, this tick. And there'll be more time to talk about in the future. Sometimes it's felt like a curse. More often than not, I recognize it as a gift and a blessing. But the one thing it has consistently taught me is what it means to rely on God. Which, not ironically, is really what today's sermon is about. If you were going to encapsulate today's sermon in one sentence, it would be with this: that humility and trust lead to reliance on God, which leads us to eternity. Humility and trust lead to reliance on God, which leads us to eternity. The title of today's sermon is A Great Treasure in a Broken Vessel. If you're already in 2 Corinthians 4, great. If not, go ahead and turn there. I may not even read directly, but I'll be referring to it enough where it'll be helpful for you to have it handy. In verse 7 of 2 Corinthians 4, right in the middle of the passage that I thought Ramayan read so well, it says, "We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." So if you read nothing else, it's actually kind of a strange sentence. What is this treasure? What are these jars of clay? We're going to really, in many ways, when you pick a whole chapter to research and to study and then to present, there's always going to be a lot you can't get to, and that will be true today. But I think we will touch on the heart of the passage in 2 Corinthians 4, and perhaps what tends to draw us to this passage. So the first obvious question, what is the treasure? The treasure is the gospel of Jesus. What does that mean? That's nice. It's very like a nice religious thing to say, but what is the gospel of Jesus? Why is it a treasure? Well, the simple truth about Jesus, the fact that he came here, he died, he rose again, has a greater power than any other truth to change your life and the trajectory of the world. The gospel has changed the world. Despite the cynicism of our age when it comes to religion, if Jesus had never been born, so much would be different about our world. And I want to talk about some of those things. Did you know that if Jesus were never born, we would not have the modern-day hospital? Consider this quote from a historian. In the pre-Christian Roman Empire, hospitals existed only for soldiers, gladiators, and slaves. Manual laborers and other poor individuals had no place of refuge. Men therefore feared death and took little interest in the sick, but often drove them out of the house and left them to their fate. What you know of as the modern-day hospital primarily came from Christians trying to carry out the healing ministry of Jesus. Many of the great hospitals can be traced directly to the Council of Nicaea. This is a quote from Donald Shook Jr., who of course I know you all know and love well. Following the Council of Nicaea in 325, when the bishops of the church were instructed to go out into every cathedral city in Christendom and start a hospital. 325 is one of the most important moments in Christianity historically, post-Jesus. And bishops, who were just basically church leaders from all over the world, came together and they made decisions about which books of the Bible will be in canon, as in which ones we believe are from the apostles, from God. And while they were all there, they said, I want you, when you go back to your city, you must start a hospital. It's pretty amazing stuff. The hospital, as you know, in fact, many hospitals are still named St. Jude, St. Joe, St. John, St. Jerry. I haven't heard that one. St. Mary. And if you look at the origin of hospital names, many of the hospitals you know as not Christian names, if you go back to trace them, almost all of them had started with a Christian name. Why do you think that is? Because the founders were Christians. Orphanages. The way that the ancient world treated children is appalling to the point of it's nausea. In ancient Rome in particular, children were treated like trash. It was not abnormal if a family did not want their baby to simply leave them out in a wild place to be eaten by wild animals or killed by the weather or taken by bad people. And it became a normal practice of Christians because of the way Jesus taught the value of human life, that we're all made in God's image. It became normal for Christians to figure out where people would drop their kids and raise them. And thus we have born some of the origins of our modern day orphanages. In fact, if you've ever visited an orphanage and you met the people who run it, you realize the majority of them are faithful people. Because it's about the hardest job you can ever have. Education. Let me give you a quote. Dr. James Kennedy.
Come on, doctor.
Sounds like an important guy. Most of the world's greatest universities, he says, were started by Christians for Christian purposes. Interesting. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown, Northwestern, William and Mary, and 90% of the first 123 universities established in America were by Christians for Christian purposes. And many of them, the only degree was Christian theology. So ironic when you think about them now. In fact, Harvard, which is not a school of faith, it's now considered a secular institution, still has the engraving of the founder, and it's all about faith in Jesus. Some people got to be struggling walking under that arch. University of Florida, where I went to school, many of the donations made to build these buildings, they had no choice because people were getting $30 million. They had Christian engravings on them. I'm sure you can find them buried under rubble at Michigan too. Interestingly enough, literacy and education for the masses was not a normal thing in ancient times. Primarily was started with the advent of the Gutenberg Bible in the 16th century, which is basically the Bible for the masses, and the printing press. And the primary motivator of education for the common man was so they could read the Bible.
Yeah, that's
Most
true.
educators were Christians, were ministers. In fact, I didn't even put this, but a lot of the reasons we have codified language in all these languages is because missionaries codified them so they could read the Bible to the people they were reaching out to. There's so many more, and we could go on. We could talk about, do we even need to talk about charities? How many nonprofits and charities, a massive percentage of them are because of people's faith in God. Because this is what they believe is right. Millions of lives have been changed. In so many ways, Jesus has changed the world in ways we never would have thought he had. What if he had never been born? It would be as dark as it was before he was born. A very barbaric place. And I'm not saying we don't live in a barbaric time now. It's a lot less barbaric because of Jesus. And I just think about the millions of lives that have been changed by the pure and simple motivation that I think is best encapsulated in this sentence. How many people have changed because they've said, I want to be like Jesus because I love him? When you read about Jesus and you see the way he lived, to see the way he cared about children, the way he talked about people, the way he talked about the vulnerable, a lot of the best things in our system of government came from Jesus. Even that. You look at Jesus and you see the individual's life change. When people have this attitude, they become a blessing to the world, not a curse. It's when people carry the name of Christianity but don't live it out, that's when they become a curse.
Come on.
When you live like this, you develop a perspective shaped by trust. And if you're looking for a point to write down in your notebook, this is the only one I got. If you want a perspective shaped by trust, you've got to love Jesus. God has taken this great treasure, the gospel, that we just expounded on. Why is it a treasure? Well, that's why it's a treasure. It changed the world. It changes your life. It changes my life. And he's placed this treasure in the equivalent of a jar of clay. Jars of clay are incredibly fragile. In ancient times, it's where you'd house your stuff. If you drop the jar, it will shatter. If any of you guys have like a mug that you made when you were a kid, or that I would make these mugs in middle school and I give them to my mom and really think they were good. And they were just and my mom still has them, God bless her. The only human, my dad was like, let's chuck this. My mom's like, I can't. I'm amazed it made it. They're fragile. You drop them once, they're done. God says he's placed this great treasure in those vessels, and we are the jars of clay. You are the vessel. You are the fragile, prone to breaking vessel that God has given this treasure for you to hold, to house, and to share. But in what way are we broken? I think we could all talk in a lot of ways. I have two stories personally. We were playing soccer the other night. A lot of us in church were playing soccer. And very few of us actually play soccer. So it's like, if you're good, you come and you play down to our level. That's our goal. Like, it's going to be a really mediocre game of soccer, but we're going to play really hard. And I was playing defense, and one of the better players in the other team crossed it through the middle. Max was at goal, and he's doing a great job. And I was the last line of defense for him, so I was like, I got his back. And as soon as this ball left this guy's foot, I thought, that's going to totally be in range for a header. And then everything went in slow motion. And I was like, do you want this head to connect with that ball? What are the ramifications of this? You already get headaches reasonably frequently. Do you think that's going to help? You're not a professional soccer player. It's going to hit you in the wrong spot. You're going to get a mild concussion. And you know what? If even if it just hurts a little bit, you still have 3 kids to take home and bathe. I didn't even want to know the time. I think it was like 8:05. And I knew, I was like, this is all split second. The ball's halfway there. And when it got to me, you know what I did? I ducked. I made sure that thing did not hit me in the head. Because I processed my own brokenness when it was on the way. Luckily, the other player wasn't able to capitalize. I turned around and Max was like, what happened, man? I was like, I made a choice. Self-preservation. It's the joy of mediocre soccer. Good chance they won't hit it in. There is a word, it's called misophonia. Anybody know what this word means? I know Emily knows what this word means. Misophonia is actually a disorder that Emily and I want to say we have, but because people probably have it, it's worse we won't. This is what it is. Misophonia is a disorder in which certain sounds trigger emotional or physiological, I did not make this up, or physiological responses that some might perceive as unreasonable given the circumstance. If you needed to get information out of me that I had locked up like a secret treasure hoard, you don't need to do anything elaborate. No elaborate tortures or questions. Just put someone next to me chewing gum. I will tell you anything you want to know. Anything. The sound of a metal spoon clanking on the bottom of a ceramic bowl when someone's eating cereal, it's like someone's poking me with a needle. Yeah. I mean, you're like in my ear. Yeah. If you don't, some might perceive this as unreasonable. Some understand. No. I don't think I have a disorder. But I have I don't know why this bothers me so much. As for as long as I'm alive, last 30 years of my 35 years, it has drove me nuts. And I feel so bad for my wife. She has had to become like a silent eater. You know what I mean? And she can see the side. I try not to give the side, but I can't help it. And up to a certain point, it didn't bother me with my kids, and we've reached the stage where my first two. I don't know what happened. I don't know why it happened. But one day I did care. It was like, it doesn't seem like you care about their smacking sound. And maybe that triggered me. And now I can't do it. I have to have music on in the background. It drives Kristen crazy. I don't blast it, but it's got to be, I have to have something going on. Why do we have disorders? Or like not really disorders. Why do we have weakness? Why are we prone to failure? Because God has made you that way. 2 Corinthians 7, it says, God has made you like a jar of clay. Why? So that you might rely on Him. God knows that without weakness, we would not rely on Him for strength. He knows that without pain, we would not run to Him for healing. He's aware that if we never felt broken, we would never feel the need for healing. The question for you, of course, in what way are you broken? What in you is broken? Tyler and I were talking this morning. I was just kind of sharing with him. We have 5 kids between us, and the 4 oldest ones, it's like clockwork. One of them will start crying, and we're always like, please let it not be mine. But it's a 50% chance. And for the Eastmans, it's a 75% chance. Right? Just because of where we're at. And I've shared this with you before, my instinctive response to my children's pain is irritation. That's wrong, right? Like, when my response to someone's pain is, I'm bothered, I would even go so far as to say that's wicked. Now, I fight this urge, and I try to show compassion, but that's a brokenness in me. That's sinful nature. For you, in what way are you broken? In what way do you need to lean on Jesus? Especially in what ways do you not do it? That's going to become an important question as we take the Lord's Supper afterward. God specifically fashioned you to rely on Him. And at its root, how do we become reliant? What kind of people rely on God? The very first step in reliance of what I believe is a two-step process to reach reliance. Step number 1 is humility. Step number 2 is trust. I believe with these two things, godly reliance comes. Why humility? Before you choose to rely on something, you have to decide that you need to rely on something. For most of us, we don't seek help unless we need it. If we can do something, we usually don't ask for help. With God, if you don't think you need God, you will never rely on Him. And of course, we would all say in church, of course I need God. But where it really comes out is just in your day-to-day life. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Once you've decided that you need God, you have to choose to trust Him rather than something else, to heal your brokenness, to shore up your wounds. Is it going to be God, or am I going to cope in some other way? What are your coping mechanisms? Self-reliance, really, in spades, if it takes over your life, it's really just pride manifested in your life. God created you to be dependent on Him. The question really that I was thinking about is, are we convinced that we actually have no power to influence and that we're worthless without God? And I use those stronger words intentionally. You know, when we were leaving Gainesville, my wife and I, 2.5 years ago, we had a pretty prominent role in the church. I was leading the worship ministry, and it was a church of 250, so it was a little bigger production. We were leading the college ministry that at one point was over 100, kind of spanned, it fluctuated up and down, big group. We were training some people in the ministry. I was given the honor of helping make decisions for the church. I mean, that was like in the lifeblood of the church. We had been there a long time, through a lot of junk. And when you go through junk with people, you become important in their life. I remember thinking, when we were evaluating whether we should move, one of the thoughts that came to our head is, can the church stand to lose us? I thought that. And when it was just in my head, it sounded okay. And then I said it out loud. And I was like, wow. That does smack of arrogance, doesn't it? What will happen if we leave to the church? Church is fine. We could make an argument that maybe it's even better than we left. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The point is, did the church really need me? No. The church needs Jesus. Right. It does not need me. God will always fill those holes in. There is a theologian. Am I there yet? Yeah, I think so. Anybody know who this guy is?
Timothy Keller.
This is Timothy Keller. Timothy Keller is arguably the most influential theologian of the 21st century and late 20th century. Many people refer to him as the modern-day C.S. Lewis. He's written a dozen bestsellers, thousands of sermons and podcasts. He has changed my life. I've never met the guy. Our tag for Ann Arbor Church is we're a church not for ourselves. That's like how we frame ourselves, and we really try to live that way. Guess who I stole that from? Timothy Keller's church, Redeemer Church. Timothy Keller died about 3 or 4 months ago. A 3-year battle with pancreatic cancer. Timothy Keller changed millions of lives. I mean, if you've never read anything he's written, yes. Some of the best books I've ever read on theology, apologetics. He has a book on marriage that I'm eager to read. Amazing guy. Humble, just powerful speaker, super intelligent, and he died. And we have recorded his final words. And I don't know if these are literally the last things he said, but it's the last things his kids remember him saying when he died. A man of this import in the world. You know what he said to his family? He said, there is no downside for me leaving, not in the slightest. me leaving changes nothing about the world. And you think like, come on, dude. Like, my first thought when he passed was I was sad for me. Because I was like, I want to keep hearing your stuff. Like, I don't want you to be gone. I would think, like, why would God take this man from the earth? He got a lot of years left. And that was not his perspective on his life, despite the successes he had. And he was a man whose reputation was not tarnished even after death. And aren't we thankful for that just occasionally?
Yeah, right.
Doesn't it seem like as soon as someone retires from the thing they were doing or even passes away, you learn this horrible information about them. And you're like, I wish no one would have told me that.
Right.
Well, this was a man of integrity. He died, and you know how he processed that? It's probably better way than I go. You know who said that same thing? Jesus said that too. You know who else? John the Baptist. John the Baptist, Jesus said no greater man has ever existed than John the Baptist. And when Jesus came on the scene, you know what John the Baptist said of Jesus? He must become greater and I must become less. Humility is beautiful and it's exceedingly rare. Exceedingly rare. Are you a humble person? Only with humility will you ever seek God out. It's the first step. Do you have a humility that leads to a reliance on Jesus? Perhaps the best people to tell you if you're humble are your closest friends. They're also the scariest ones to ask. And you know what? There's a way to ask it. Don't just assume your friends will tell you if you're prideful. They probably won't, because if you're prideful, they won't tell you, because you're not receptive. The best way to do it is you say, Owen, everybody talk to Owen. Like, Owen, I want you to tell me what you talk about with your spouse, but you don't have yet. I'm sure it will happen. You're a great guy. I want you to tell me what you really think, like what you would tell other people about me in a safe place. I want to know what you think about me, about my character. Do you think I'm humble? Buckle up. Don't ask the safe person. Don't ask your biggest fan. Ask the one that you know is going to, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. They're going to tell it to you straight. Like that's humility. Only with that kind of humility will God move in your life. You need him. You have to believe you need him. If humility is the first step, then trust is the second. Do you trust God? What a loaded question. Perhaps there is no more important question in life about a person than what they think about God. Do you trust him? Do you still think he's good when life is horrible? Do you still think he's good when horrible things are happening in the world? Do you still think he's good when everything about your life seems like it's shouting he's not? What do you think about God? What are the limits of your trust? Humility is the first step, but you have to move to trust. At what point do you say of God, this is too much? No more. I don't want you to do anymore. What you're doing is wrong. Why are you treating me like this? Perhaps you've asked this question of God before. I have. When you start reaching those questions, you realize you've reached the limit of your trust. It's a good indicator. At what point do you get there? Paul, in these passages, he's challenging your level of trust. And notice in chapter 4, in verse 8, he says, we're hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around our body the death of Jesus so that his life could be made clear to you, right? He says, when you're hard-pressed, when you're perplexed, I like that one because I often feel perplexed, confused about what God may be doing, about why this is happening in life. When you're persecuted, when the closest people to you are persecuting you, when you're hurting, how do you cope with that? What are your coping mechanisms? Perhaps it's food. Perhaps it's your phone. Perhaps it's a relationship or a substance, video games, a TV show. How do you cope with the rigor of just one day? You know, after the long day and you're struggling because your kids have been just literally crying all day because they just are playing so hard. It's like feast or famine. It's like we're playing hard or we're weeping. You know what I mean? After a day like that, when you come home after a super long day at work or you had 3 conversations you were not anticipating that were terrible, how do you cope with that? I think sometimes we'll talk about things like, obviously, the Bible's very clear on like alcohol. Like there's a reason it says don't get drunk on too much wine or drink too much because it's an easy coping, but it's kind of the easy church answer. Don't get drunk. Roger that, right? Like, it doesn't mean it's not really hard for some of us. It doesn't mean some of us don't struggle daily with that. What I mean is sometimes I think we underappreciate that we struggle with things just as much, but it's more kosher.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what do you watch at night? What shows are, if I went on your Netflix, continue watching? You're like, continue watching with your children, continue watching with your minister. You know what I mean? That's like a whole separate login, right? It's like I can't log in. What are you and how much are you eating? I've been talking about this with some of my friends lately too. How often and how easily does your phone suck you into the vortex? How many hours legitimately are you spending on that fill in the blank? Like if you were to write it out for us, would it be hard for you to share in front of this group? If that's the case, you're probably coping in a way that's not godly.
Yeah.
And perhaps only you know that. Do you turn to prayer when things are hard? Do you lean into the church or do you lean away from the church? Do you crave the Bible or do you shun the Bible? Will you still share the gospel when life's hard, or does life hardships justify our selfishness and, dare I say, our cowardice in our evangelism? Consider your ungodly coping mechanisms. What changes do you need to make to become increasingly reliant on God? I have to turn my phone off every night, what one author called putting your phone to bed, because it's just my constant annoying companion. And for me, it's a coping mechanism because when people reach out to me, text, email, it makes me feel wanted, which is like a drug. Turning it off is actually a sign of trust for me. And then waiting till I pray to turn it back on. That's the goal. I don't always do it. I don't always reach it, but that's the goal. For me, food, I joke a lot about ice cream, which I do love so much. There's a reason I put limits on myself. It's an act of self-discipline for me to remind myself you actually don't need this. You don't need, this is a luxury that you actually don't need. You could go the rest of your life and not eat this and you'd be fine. I need to do that. I don't know what you're going through. I'm sure you're going through something. And this passage, we will end the sermon the same way the passage ends. Don't lose heart, my friends. It says, don't lose heart. Outwardly, you are wasting away. You're like, amen. You know, it's terrible. But inwardly, you are being renewed day by day. He says these light and momentary troubles, which never feel that way. He says that on purpose. There are times, we're going to read these, where Paul says, it was like the sentence of death on me. It didn't feel light and momentary to him either. It's in light of an eternal perspective that you can only have if you have the humility to know you need God and the trust to rely on Him. Only with that can you develop an eternal perspective. And when you have an eternal perspective, and you know that our moments are finite, your pain is momentary, and it will soon be swallowed up with life, everything is light and momentary. That is truth. It's the reason you can get through the day when you know you're doing something fun later. Or on vacations next week, you're like, just one more week. You know what I mean? I can take your garbage because I'm 5 days away, you know? And while you're so sad, you're like, only one more day of vacation, I'm not having enough fun. You know, whatever. Vacations were weird about them. You must not let anything stand in between you and this treasure that is the gospel. Is there really any cost you wouldn't be willing to pay if you could transport yourself to your future when you're standing before God? Is there any cost you wouldn't pay for Him to tell you, well done, good and faithful servant? When right now there seems like costs you may not be willing to pay. But when you're there, the answer is, there's only one answer to that question. The answer is, there is no cost I wouldn't pay. Anything else is broken logic in the now. Because when the next comes, when heaven is available, when it's there, when you're before God, everything's stripped away, all pretension, all the things you thought were important that weren't important, all the things you knew were important that you leaned into, that you're gifted for that. You're blessed for that. But if you spent your whole life and God was a part of your life, but He wasn't your whole life, you're going to regret that. The eternal perspective changes everything. It even changes the way you think about death. How strange this fear of death is, George MacDonald said, because we're never afraid at sunset. Sunset's the best part of the day. Death is the best part of your life, if you have an eternal perspective. If you don't, death is terrifying. We got to close out here. You know, Yana talked about it. Our youngest daughter, Noelle, many of you know this, she was diagnosed with cerebral palsy about 3 months ago. And it's been such a roller coaster. And, you know, it's easy to think in those moments what a curse this is. With just a little bit of faith, it's already become perhaps one of the greatest blessings God has ever given our family. The way it's transforming our family, you'll hear me talk about it more. I'm not going to hit you with it now because I'm a little out of time. The way it's changing me, it's hard to put into words how this little human being has changed my life. And I'm watching it change my other kids. I'm watching it change my wife. It's a gift. There's no way I think that way if I'm not just trying to rely on God in my suffering. I won't. It'll devastate my faith. And that's what horrible diagnoses do to a lot of people. It devastates people's faith. But how could God be here? Until you suffer well, you'll never be able to answer the question, how can God be here? And then once you get through it, you think, how could I not have seen God? And what he was doing. It's always that way on the other side.
Yeah.
Humility and trust lead to reliance on God, and that will lead you into eternity. That humility, that trust you develop, brings a reliance on God, and it will carry you. The things that Satan throws in your path to hinder you, God turns it into fuel to propel you closer to God.
Right.
He turns it around, but only with the right perspective will you think that way.
Yeah.
We're going to take the Lord's Supper now. And we're going to do it a little differently. Oftentimes in Ann Arbor Church, when we take the Lord's Supper, we have a time of quiet reflection. And that will be part of this, and I love that time. But sometimes we try to make it a little more interactive. In fact, the very first Lord's Suppers were dinners that the Christians had together. And just communing with Jesus. So what I'd like us to do is I want you to find, in groups of 2 to 4, I try to give it like, not groups of 1. The only thing I don't want you to do is a group of 1. If you're sad and you don't know where to go, you can come and talk to me. I'll be right over there. And I want you each just to very briefly share the question, in what ways do I need to rely on God more? Just pick one. In what way are you broken and you need God more? It doesn't mean it has to be an area you're failing in. It can be an area you're doing great in, that you just need God's provision. Each of you share that, and then perhaps one of the people can pray for the group and pray for Jesus just to help us and reflect on how he does. Then we're going to sing a song, have a couple announcements, and close it out. Sound good? I'm going to say a prayer, and if you get stressed about, like, I don't know, just turn around or turn to the side, and if you're totally lost, I will help you. If you need a communion cup, you can raise your hand. One will be brought to you, and we always provide a gluten-free option. It's that little plate on the counter. All right? Let's say a prayer. Father God, we do love you, and we want to be people who rely on you. We want to be people who can genuinely say, we want to follow you because we love you. Thank you for all you've done in this world. Thank you for what you're doing in our lives. Help us to go to you, to rely on you, and to remember that this life is social, and that soon it will be swallowed up with real life. We love you. I pray for this time as we reflect on you and we interact with one another. Help it to be rich and meaningful. Your son's name we pray. Amen.